Now let's talk about drug legislation. Let's talk about FFDA of 1906 or Federal Food and Drugs Act of 1906. With this legislation, it required drug manufacturers to list on the drug product label the presence of any dangerous and possibly addicting substances. And it also recognized the U.S. Pharmacopoeia and National Formulary as printed reference standard for drugs. Next is Shirley Amendment of 1912. So this basically prohibited fraudulent claims for drug products. So basically a drug company can't say this is going to cure diabetes when it doesn't. Next, Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938. So this required drug manufacturers to provide data providing drug safety with FDA review. So this was prompted by the sulfanilamide elixir tragedy. Sulfanilamide basically was dissolved in diethylene glycol or DEG. This medication that was present and was being used at the time, they basically wanted to convert it into a liquid form. Anyhow, what they did is they tested for the flavor, its appearance, and fragrance. But unfortunately, they did not test it for safety. So this medication killed over 100 people, and patients died in severe pain, and most of these patients were actually children. Next is Kefauver-Harris Amendment of 1962. So this legislation required manufacturers to demonstrate both therapeutic efficacy and safety of new drugs. This, on the other hand, was prompted by the thalidomide tragedy. Thalidomide was a sedative drug that was used to treat nausea back in the day. This drug was given to pregnant women. Eventually, it was discovered that the drug caused irreversible and severe congenital malformations of at least 15,000 children worldwide. Controlled Substances Act of 1970. So this established schedules for controlled substances, which we're actually going to talk about later on in this unit. It also promoted drug addiction education, research, and treatment. Accelerated Drug Review Regulations of 1991. This enabled faster approval by the FDA of drugs to treat life-threatening illnesses, which was prompted by the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Next, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996, more commonly known by its acronym HIPAA, not HIPPA, it's actually HIPAA. This officially required all health-related organizations as well as schools to maintain privacy of protected health information. Medicare Prescription Drug Improvement and Modernization Act of 2003, or more commonly known as Medicare Part D, provides seniors and persons with disabilities with an insurance benefit program for prescription drugs. The cost of medication is shared by the patient and the federal government. Legal considerations. Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, is responsible for approving drugs for clinical safety and efficacy before they are brought to the market. DAA, or Drug Enforcement Agency, they're responsible for monitoring controlled substances. And we also have to keep in mind individual state laws, and that can change depending on where you're at. Impact of legislation. So the legislations will impact basically drug therapy, right? Because it influences the timeline for approval, access such as insurance, formulary, costs, and definitely it does affect how we bring a drug to the market, and it also affects the senior population. Now, legislations, as we know, can also aid in withdrawing certain drugs from the market, especially if it's proven that those drugs are unsafe for people to consume. Generally, it does affect brand and trade names, generics, black box warning, label and off-label use of drugs, and also nursing. So in nursing, legislations affect nursing because, one, it requires us nurses, right, to know something about the drug we're giving. That's our responsibility to our patients. In addition, we are required to provide patient education. Some additional legal considerations and resources. Nursing Practice Act, so in our case of California, these are state laws that define the scope of nursing practice. This varies state by state. Depending on where you're going to practice eventually, you will have to know your scope of practice because it may be different from that of California. The Joint Commission. And you'll hear this a lot, or JCAHO. This organization gives accreditation to different healthcare facilities. They conduct surveys to ensure that facilities are adhering to certain standards and guidelines. Then you're also going to hear about Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS. Then we have Standards of Care by American Nurses Association, or ANA. Basically, they develop professional guidelines and establish clinical practice standards. And also, we have different organizations' policies and protocols. Then we have CDC, or Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and IOM, Institute of Medicine, ISMP, Institute of Safe Medication Practice, QSEN, or Quality and Safety Education for Nurses, and last but not the least, part of the legislation is documentation. Why am I including this here? Our documentation is going to be part of is considered a legal document. So in case something happens, patients or families sue, or there's some sort of investigation going on, our documentation is considered legal evidence. So that can be used in court. So it's very important that we document accurately and as much as possible in real time, or as timely as we can.